Greetings, programs, and welcome to the Awesome Friday podcast. My name is Matthew, and I'm your host, and we're here to talk about two movies this week, as is the way we do things generally. But in the way we don't do things generally, we have an extra guest, a special guest this week. So joining me is Simon, as usual. Say hello, Simon.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming back.
And then also we're being joined today by Dakota Arsenault of the Contra Zoom Podcast. A longtime friend and listener of the show, and one of my co-founders for the Cascadia Critics Association. Say hello, Dakota.
Hello, Dakota. I'm just really happy that the band.
Knew that was going to happen.
every time I listen to the show, I always expect Simon to say hello, Simon. When you say hello, Simon.
I left it for you.
That's something I just do in my head. I don't know, but I'm just really glad that the finally been lifted on me coming on this show. I know you've been very strict at a one Contra Zoom pod person only allowed, and I guess Rachel's now been blacklisted and I'm allowed to come on.
So for the record,
Yeah,
and if
Rachel's just too big now. Like she's
Rachel is
her PA doesn't return our calls.
Rachel's not blacklisted, and the original plan was actually to have you both on, but the problem is that she is both too cool and very busy. I believe she's. Well, I believe at the time we're recording this, I believe she's on the jury of a film festival. So it's yeah. So she's very cool, and we're very glad to have her as a friend of the show. And the lack of her on the show in the past, say, like 6 months is not for lack of trying. Believe me, we've been trying to organize it. She's been away and busy and cool and much bigger than all of us. So,
have you ever seen those videos of people like, who's the most famous person in your phone book, and you save it as a contact? I choose Rachel as my answer.
It's probably mine too, to be honest. That's actually like in my contact list. Yeah, probably. So yeah, Dakota, why don't you tell us, since this is your first time on the show, I've been on your show a number of times now, and I think Simon's been on once or twice. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your show before we get really going here, so that the listeners know they should be listening to your show, because they should be, because it's a great show. Not just because we're on it, but because it's a great show.
It's fantastic because I got some great guests all the time, including which just make it that much better. No, I don't know. Every time I'm a guest on a podcast, I always forget that I'm supposed to promote myself too, and I forget how to do that, and words just escape me. But yeah, we're a movie podcast. So if you like movie podcasts, which if you're listening to this one, I'm pretty sure you like movie podcasts. And every week I kind of try to do different themes and things like that. I do things like working our way through A24's filmography. We cover film festivals. Sometimes we have interviews. I like doing movie anniversaries, stuff like that, and including a topic that we're doing today, where we're covering an original and a remake. That's something that I've done a multiple amount of times as well too. But yeah, I try to keep it fresh and keep it exciting. And Rachel Ho is a fantastic co-host, but she's also very busy sometimes. So I have the good fortune of bringing in a lot of great people to come in and substitute and fill in for her. People like the two of you, people that are also involved in the Cascadia Film and Television Critics Association, just general film fans, everyone that I can get. I want to have as many people on as I can, and that's the beauty of it. And sort of the downside is I can only record one episode a week, and I've got like a list of like 50 people I want eventually to be on the show, and I need to find the time. But then I also want to have returning favorites like you, Matthew, who I go to many times, and you as well, Simon, who I've had a couple times and want to have back on as well.
Who's your favorite? Who's your favorite person you've ever had on? You're gonna have to choose one.
You know what? For to be diplomatic, I am going to say the question. I cannot choose the two of you, so I'm going to.
Oh no, it's fine. I had no assumptions. It's fine.
I always get great feedback when Bill Antoniou is on the show. He hosts the podcast.
Bill's great though.
Yeah, Bill's
so
fantastic.
What does he host? I don't know.
Bad Gay Movies, or Bad Gay Movies, Bitchy Gay Men, if you want the full title. Hilarious. He reviews terrible gay movies and makes fun of them. But he is probably, I don't think I've ever met someone who has seen as many movies as he has, and he has just an absolutely encyclopedic brain. And he's also really hilarious. I don't know if you'll listen to this. If I tell him I mentioned him, he'll probably listen to this, and then he'll give me feedback, because he always gives me notes on every episode. He's trying to stop
Wow.
corrections in notes. He'll send me feedback. So thanks, Bill. Really appreciate that.
So I don't really know Bill hardly at all, but I have contributed to his Criterion and now Classics shelf articles over at that shelf, and yeah, he seems like a great guy. And yeah, the type of person that you think I am, Simon, in terms of like encyclopedic knowledge of films, that's what I think of Bill. So just put that in perspective. It's like an order of magnitude situation.
Right.
He's
the pub quiz guy, is he? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that I think me and Bill on a pub quiz team, we would just need a sports guy. Really, is all we would need. So
hey, how's it going? I like sports.
Yeah, that's you. Absolutely. Do you need someone for English grammar or any kind of like punctuation advice, when to use an Oxford comma, anything like that? Just bear me in mind. I'm fascinating at parties, really.
I mean, we could talk about the Oxford comma for a long time, but that is a different podcast, sir.
Don't get me fucking started on the Canadian approach to the Oxford comma. But anyway, that is a whole different podcast.
I mean, yeah.
So
we have our own particular areas of interest, and one of Simon's is boring.
Well, oh, you motherfucker. It's only boring when other people teach it. Like, I make it cool. I make grammar cool. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yep.
Sure. Anyway. Yeah. It's only my specialist subject because I couldn't get any money for being a film director. So I ended up being an English teacher. That's the way it goes.
I think it's a fairly common story. So,
yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, maybe we should dive into the main show now that we've had several minutes of banter. But before we do, this is just your reminder that we do have a Patreon, and if you'd like to support the show, if you like the discussions, if you like our banter, we'll link those in the show notes, and it'll come up again at the end of the show. But we do have a Patreon, and you can support us via Ko-fi, or just by giving us a review on your podcasting platform of choice. But now we're going to talk about a movie and its recent remake. We're going to dive into the 1989 80s action classic Roadhouse and the 2024 Amazon Studios cash-in Roadhouse. I don't know for sure, but I think I liked the new one better than both of you guys. But that's a discussion for several minutes from now. But in the meantime, let's dive into the 89 version just a little bit. And Dakota, you're the guest here. Why don't you give us a quick plot synopsis of 1989's Roadhouse?
You know, as long as I could be quicker in the synopsis than Simon usually is, I think I'll consider it a win.
Whoa, you're in my house now. Like, if you want to give a 20-minute like rambling synopsis, you go for it.
If anything, I think this is one that needs a 20-minute synopsis too, because it is so delightfully unhinged.
Yeah. Okay, so where to start? So there's this guy named Dalton, played by Patrick Swayze. He is basically, he's not a bouncer. He's basically sort of a combination head of security / bar manager at this really fancy upscale bar, and he is the best in the business. He can throw someone out of a bar like no one you have ever seen before without breaking a sweat, and looks good doing it. And then along comes another guy who owns this really rundown, violent roadhouse, if you want to call it, a guy named Frank, played by Kevin Teague. And he's like, hey, I'm trying to upscale my bar and I got too much riffraff going on and my staff can't handle it. I need you. I need the best. And he's like, I'm not the best. Wade Garrett's the best. And he's like, no, Wade Garrett's old. I need you, Dalton. And he's like, all right, you know what? You drive a hard bargain. I will take your money and I will come to your bar and clean it up. So he goes to what southern state is it? Kentucky? Is it? I don't know. Somewhere in the
It's
south.
Missouri. It's Missouri.
Missouri. Sure, they're all the same. And he basically goes to this Roadhouse bar that's called the Double Deuce, and he sits there drinking his black coffee and watches how all the staff at the Double Deuce are absolutely incompetent. And so he agrees to take the job, but everything has to be done his way or the highway. And very quickly, he starts firing the bad employees, cleaning the place up. But then, as he's cleaning it up, realizes that he's actually getting under the nerve of the local big businessman, Brad Wesley, played by legendary actor Ben Gazzara, and Dalton is really getting under Wesley's skin, and it turns into basically a huge showdown. And eventually, Wade Garrett, the guy who's actually the best in the business, comes and backs up Dalton, and they show Brad Wesley, who's the real kingpin. Lots of kicks. Lots of punches, lots of feathered hair on men.
Even more on women.
M. Elliott. Yeah, I feel like we're going to get into a lot of it, but yeah, I feel like that's about the best I could do of describing the plot of Roadhouse.
Yeah, I should say that like Roadhouse came out in 1989. I don't think we're in danger of any real spoilers here. But yeah, that is basically it. We're basically talking about a Western set in 1989. Right, like that's there's a new sheriff in town, and he's gonna clean up the saloon, and that is what happens. Correct me if I'm wrong, but both Dakota and Simon, this is your first time watching the original, right? Like you've never seen it before.
Yep, that's correct.
So just as a bit of context for me, it's not my first time watching it. I've only seen it the whole way through a couple of times in my life, but it is the kind of movie that would like be on TV when I was a kid and younger and middle aged. And the amazing thing about this movie is that it makes so little sense that it doesn't matter what time you tune into the movie. If you catch it on TV, it makes the same amount of sense the whole time because it is so just wild and unhinged. But what was your Simon? Let's switch over to you for a second. What was your impression watching Roadhouse for the first time?
I was really interested in how I would feel about it with zero nostalgia because we've talked at length about how a lot of movies from that time aren't great, but because of our nostalgia, they get carried through. And of course, I had zero connection with this whatsoever or knowledge. I really had no idea what it was about at all. And my first reaction is that it's a fascinating time capsule of like that switch, that moment when 1989 becomes 1990, where things get a bit more blue and chrome, and the action movies pivot a little bit. And I wasn't sure I liked it until I realized I did. And does that make any sense whatsoever? Because
it does.
And I also had no idea that it was to MacGruber what 0 Hour is to Airplane. Like there are so many. It's made me appreciate MacGruber on a whole different level. There's one just from his intro where he walks across and his hair is filling like the top third of the screen itself. And the guy tries to come over. And there's one fantastic line who's like, I'm flying over. He said, I don't fly. Too dangerous. I'm like, oh my god. Oh, it's that kind of movie. And it's that late 80s movie tradition of just boobs everywhere, just like breasts everywhere. And I watched a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies from that era as well, and it's the same kind of theme. And I really appreciated this film for having a protagonist who is a classic introvert like lead this movie and not try and make him like. I think one of the many huge failings of the remake is how to position Dalton, and they positioned Dalton in the original as this guy who doesn't it doesn't. It's not that he's standoffish or aloof like how Ryan Gosling is in Drive. He's genuinely a bit introverted, but he's also the guy who can. That gives him his strength to sit back, to analyze the room, and be nice. Be nice to people. And there's one fantastic moment where he's in his boat, and the waitress Laurie Petty turns up with breakfast. And he's like, "Oh God, a person! How did she find me?" I'm like, "Yes, I feel seen." Like, like I know that reaction completely. And I don't have huge knowledge of Patrick Swayze's work, and to see this in his filmography being like a year before Ghost, 2 years before Point Break, it's a really fascinating time for his filmography because I know the other films really, really well. And he's I don't know, Swayze. I don't need to tell you that Swayze's got this. He's got that screen presence, and I think that the kind of character he's playing and all that ongoing joke of "I thought you'd be bigger," and he plays up to that so well. And then it's just I love how action movies flirted in the late '80s, like when the nurse comes in, when the doctor comes in rather, and then there's one point later where he takes her back to her house and he basically stalks her across his front room while she's trying to get away from him. But he's so full of sexual magnetism. That's who he is. And I enjoyed this. I enjoyed it way more than I thought. It's a fascinating sort of peek into that time. And it was great up until the last fight. The big finale fight was terrible. It had a wonderful moment of that polar bear slowly falling on someone, which reminded me of in Prometheus when the spaceship starts slowly rolling towards someone. They're like, "Oh no!" Or in Austin Powers, where the guy gets run over by
by the steamroller,
the steamroller on the ice. It's like the polar bear's like, "Oh, it's moved another few inches," and. And the old guy, so Ben Gazzara is clearly not able to to do any kind of stage combat, but on the whole, I really enjoyed it. It was a very comforting slice of that era of filmmaking that I really adored when I was a kid.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like every other 80s movie was just practice for this movie in a way.
He rips his fucking throat out. I mean, it's just glorious.
Like, it feels like they're 1989, and the people making this movie are like, well, this is the last movie of the last action movie of the 80s, so we got to do all the 80s stuff. We got to do all of it. But yeah, I mean, I feel basically the same. How about you, Dakota? How did you feel about watching it for the first time? I know this is sort of like I was interested to have your perspective on this movie because I know you're much more of like a Criterion kind of guy. And I don't mean that insultingly, but like you have a different taste in film than this movie is. So I'm very curious to hear how you reacted to it.
Yeah, I think if anyone's a regular listener to Contra Zoom, I think they're fully aware of that. I get teased pretty mercilessly by Rachel and other people about it, and I feel like you know me well enough of that this is not my type of movie. And so I went in with like extreme trepidation, and basically like people aren't gonna be able to see this, but I was basically saying there like this, being like, okay, impress me movie, let's see what you got, because there is so much lore and fanaticism for this movie and adoration. And Simon, like you, how do you watch these movies that are now, 30, almost 40 years old, where there's so much nostalgia involved in it? And you're like, can you critically look at this movie for the first time and appreciate what people were watching back then? And so I think it started out in, right away, the fact that the bouncers are world famous, right away, the hairs are standing up on the back of my neck being like, no, that's stupid. This is stupid. Why does everyone know who Dalton is? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And they give him this ridiculous backstory of that he's a philosophy major. He's got a degree in philosophy. So every once in a while, he's got these ridiculous quotes he's going to throw out there. But then slowly, as it goes on, I'm like, you know what? This movie isn't all that bad. I'm kind of appreciating it. And I think by the end of it, I don't know if I'll ever rewatch it. I don't think I loved it, but I certainly really appreciated what it was doing. And I guess the two of you probably would be able to appreciate this when, especially an action movie would come out and it's like a new sort of genre, and then there'd be like 50 derivative versions of it, and all of them are significantly worse as it goes on. And Matthew, you're kind of talking about how this is the end of the 80s, start of the 90s. I know like decades don't really start the second, January 1st hits. It usually takes a couple years to really define itself. So we still have a bit more 80s-ness going on, 90, 91, that sort of thing. Um, but this is clearly derivative in the sense of we've been watching Jean-Claude Van Damme movies and Chuck Norris movies and all those types of action movies of, oh, we got a new guy in town, he's gonna kick and punch his way to save the day. And it could have been god awful, but it ended up being pretty decent. I feel like it avoided the bad tropes and took the good tropes and sort of spun it on its head to sort of appreciate what it was doing. And so by the end, I was like, you know what? This is mostly a pretty good movie.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's a
good way to put it.
pretty good way to put it.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about a movie that exists in a universe where bouncers are famous, like world
Yeah.
famous, right?
Mhm.
Like, just from that alone, you should know like what level of movie you're getting. And I think that if you can approach it on those terms, I think that you'll have a good time. This is also a movie that doesn't just have Patrick Swayze rip a guy's throat out, but there's like an entire subplot about throats being ripped out that is treated with like, I'm not going to say like nuance is probably too strong of a word, but it is present and it is discussed, and it's just a guy getting his throat ripped out. Like, there is this movie is, I keep saying unhinged, but like that is the word for this movie. Like it I think what makes it successful is that it is completely ridiculous, but also committed to the rules it creates for itself. Right?
Mhm.
Like, it is everything. It's never inconsistent in its belief in itself, and everyone seems to have bought into the bit. And I think that is really what makes it work better than many other movies of this ilk. I don't know. Does either of you agree or disagree with that sort of idea? Especially, not to speak too much about the remake ahead of time, but especially in relation to the remake.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're going to talk about the remake in a little bit, but something the remake really highlighted to me that I've thought for a long, long time about why a lot of movies don't connect with me now like the way they used to. And if you compare the script to Roadhouse 2024 to 1989, we're in a timeline where a movie about a famous cooler with giant hair in 1989 has way more nuance in the way the story is told and the characters are introduced than one from 2024. And I think that's typical from a lot of movies, especially from streamers, that there's so much exposition and there's so many people walking into frame saying, hi, I'm this person, and this is who I am in the story, and this is your next plot point. And what I liked about Roadhouse is that a big chunk of the beginning of that movie is him just walking in and existing in a space and people reacting to him. And that tells us about who he is from the way people react to him. There's very few people going, oh, hi, I'm this man, and I play this role, and I do this. And in terms of what you're talking about, the universe, it does create its own mythos in its own universe. I don't know if bouncers were famous amongst roadhouses in certain places at that time. I very much doubt it. But because that's what they've created and that's what they're 100% into, then I'm down with that. That's fine. And it's kind of an extension of, like, a lot of action movies had their own frames, and this is their frame, and that's where they're going to fight within that sort of context. And the remake doesn't have any of that. Doesn't have any of that nuance whatsoever. It doesn't even try to. And so actually watching the remake made me realize I enjoyed the original way more and appreciate the original way more.
As a side note, like, how close together did you watch them?
I finished Roadhouse, the original, 2 days ago, and I finished the remake this morning.
Right.
So,
any further thoughts on that sort of idea, Dakota?
Yeah, I think one sort of interesting thing where the movie almost could have been even better if it would have nailed what it was going for. There's two moments in the film that I thought, Oh wow, we're getting some actual really deep commentary here. There's the scene where Dalton finally meets Wesley, and he goes to Wesley's house, and they have this conversation about what Wesley's plans are, and how he's trying to basically control the town, and everyone, pays him bribe money for protection because he's basically the mafia and all this sort of stuff. And we almost get a critique of capitalism. We almost do. And
Yeah, almost.
this yeah, I say that they start to do this critique of capitalism, and then they very quickly go, okay, never mind. We're not actually going to go that deep because it's still 1989. It's still Reagan era. We're not really actually going to say greed is bad. Greed is actually a good thing here. But we almost got that there for a brief moment. I thought that they're going to have something really nuanced and interesting to say, which maybe is probably the best that we can hope for a mainstream action blockbuster from this era, which is saying a lot. And then the other moment was after, we spend this whole movie building up to this lore of that he rips out throats, or he did that once. And it sort of feels like, oh man, this is just like a broken telephone. He punched a guy in the throat, and eventually has come to this story of he rips a guy's throat out. But we finally get that payoff. But this happens in front of the woman he's been seeing, Doc, played by Kelly Lynch. And she sees that he literally murders a guy and then throws him in the water and floats him across this lake to Wesley's house. And she is so disgusted and turned off by this and frightened by who this man has become, where I thought that was probably some of the best acting in the movie. Of there's this moment, this realization of, oh shit, this is actually who he is. He spent a little bit of like, hey, no, don't date me. I'm not a good guy. You don't know who I am. Yeah, I'm polite, but I'm not actually a good guy. And then here we actually see this monster that has come out of him. And for a brief moment, you think, okay, we're actually getting a little bit of an introspection in terms of toxic masculinity, violence, all this sort of stuff, where this is a genre film that is actually looking at itself and deconstructing itself in real time. And then unfortunately the next scene, she's back to being madly in love with him. And she kind of
Yeah.
forgot that whole moment of, oh my God, he literally ripped a guy's throat out.
Yeah, that was actually the one I was going to bring up again as well. Is that, yeah, she goes from being like, "Holy shit, he killed a guy," to "I care about you, Dalton." Like, there's not even one scene of her like staring out a window, reconciling her feelings silently. It's just a switch that gets flipped and then off screen flipped back, and it is a bit disappointing.
Yeah.
I don't care though. Like, I still unabashedly enjoy this movie. Like, it still works. But you're right. It definitely, like, it's so close to being more than it is. Like, I don't think it's the like unassailable classic that lots of people hold it up to be. In particular, for reasons like you're talking about, that scene you're talking about where he kills the henchman and floats him across the river. There's also a moment for him to like it's a great moment actually. He kills this guy, floats him across the river, and he lives across the river from the bad guy because of course he does. And there's a moment where he's like exclaims to Wesley, but instead of saying anything with any meaning, he just goes, "Fuck you, man." And like, he could have said anything there that would have been thematically on point, but he just doesn't. Like, and that's sort of the problem with the movie. I think it's the thing about the movie that holds it back from being like truly great instead of like fun thing I will watch if it's on TV. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that it gets to a point where it's almost deep and then turns away at the last second every time.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit frustrating. But then also at the end, and this is like one of my like weirdly favorite movie tropes, is you finally like snaps and he goes to the bad guy's compound and he kills roughly 1 million henchmen, and then at the last second he stops himself from killing the main boss because that would make him a bad, like, he's already killed like 20 guys at this point. But he holds back from killing Ben Gazzara because reasons. And I sort of love it, but I also never get, I'm like, why would you do this? Like, why is it that you can kill anyone without a name, but you can't kill anyone whose name is above the title card? Like, I don't get it. It's such a weird choice
I love the acting that maybe I shouldn't rip his throat down. Like, is this wrong? Am I the bad guy?
I mean, on the other hand, though, we're talking about a movie where he has unresolved PTSD about ripping a guy's throat out, and his go-to thing is ripping guys' throats out. So,
and from the moment he rips the throat out, that's when that's the where he realizes, oh, murder is the solution here. I can just like murder everyone. That's great. Like, let's go to the house.
He has this mysterious past, though, that he has this crazy PTSD about, which is that he ripped a guy's throat out. Like it's like he learned one move. He does all this Tai Chi, but he only learned one move, and that is ripping dudes' throats out. Yeah. But at least the unresolved PTSD leads to my favorite line in the movie, so that's a thing. Because we haven't talked about how great Sam Elliott is in this movie, but
I was going to say that's a proper. So I'm going to. The Sam Elliott mention, talk about that's this film's main problem is that you got Patrick Swayze, who you're trying to sell as your frontman, and then you employ Sam Elliott as his friend. And I've never seen young Sam Elliott like in his prime before. Like, oh, what? Like every time he's on screen, nobody's looking at Swayze. Even Swayze's not looking at Swayze. When they go to the cafe, and he's like, I'm not going to do my Sam Elliott voice because I don't have a mustache, but go to dance, and he's dancing with her, and he gives her a wink. I'm just thinking about I should have got you first. And Swayze's just there, like kicking his feet and giggling, and like, what's he saying? He's just lying. Don't listen to anything he says. Ah, man, what a dude though. And that there's a great, you talk about the best acting in the movie. When Sam Elliott is at the cafe and he talks to him about letting it go, and he's like staring him down and angrily telling him to let his past go. That's a great scene.
Yeah.
And again, that's Sam Elliott, who is a great actor. But yeah, he's fantastic.
But Dakota, I feel like we cut you off mid-thought there.
We did, absolutely.
It's all right. I just have a question. Why would a rich dude take over a shitty Roadhouse and not just open a new bar? That's my main question for why does this movie exist? Why not just level it, close it for 6 months, and open a new fancy bar?
You're clearly better at evil capitalism than he is. So congratulations.
Well, I guess you're talking about Kevin Teague's character, though, right? Not Ben Gazzara.
Yes.
Because Ben Gazzara is very much like the evil cattle rancher in this movie. Like, I don't know if you've seen Open Range, but this is basically just Open Range. Like, Open Range is basically a remake of Roadhouse. And that whole, like, evil man comes in and changes all our practices and the way we've done things for generations and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, like, yeah. I imagine there must be some clause. He's inherited this bar, so I imagine there must be some clause in the will that prevents him from selling it, which is why he wants to rehabilitate it. And maybe he's like the one guy in the town who wants to stand up even a little bit to the bad guy. He's the one guy who's not yet broken, except for that he's immediately shown to have been completely broken. So no, I don't get it either. But I think the answer is because then the movie wouldn't exist. It's
yeah, that's true.
One thing I noticed though is that the nicer the bar becomes, the more it looks like a 1990s food court. Everyone in matching matching tops and like wipe down tables. Everything's well lit. I'm like, you're kind of turning it into a shitty place that I don't want to go to anymore, Swayze.
Yeah, there's definitely like one thing I really liked about the movie though is it does that really smart thing where the bar continually gets nicer through the movie and nobody talks about it. It's just like
yes, it's a pretty serious overhaul.
Yeah, but like it's in the first scene, the place is, to use the movie's language, a slaughterhouse. And after it's established that Dalton's been there a couple of weeks, like you only know he's been there a couple of weeks because like the chicken wire protecting the band's stage is no longer present. And then eventually the floor is replaced and the art on the wall is better. And eventually they're all wearing like matching polo shirt. Like it's a very slow progression and the script never feels the need to be like, wow, the bar is real cleaned up, hey? Yeah. Like it trusts the audience to just notice those things, which is a thing I feel is really lost in a lot of modern trashy action movies.
This is just like a Western. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
thanks for Roadhouse 2024. Didn't work that one out.
But I mean, I don't know. There's so many. I think it's great because it leaves space for so many other great lines. So, what was there any part of the script, like the actual spoken lines, that really like jumped out to either of you? And let's start with Dakota, because I have one that I just there's one line that I really love, and I would love to hear what yours is if you have one.
I feel like the most memorable lines are all the most ridiculous ones, like "pain don't hurt," stuff like that. I brought J.C. Penney to this town. Like, stuff like that. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I don't think there's any line that like truly was insightful or memorable. Just a lot of funny ones.
I know.
My favorite interchange was being a called a cocksucker isn't personal. No, it's two nouns combined to elicit a prescribed response, which is something else. What if somebody calls my mum a whore? Is she like there's all of your character development right there. Yeah. It's just brilliant.
For me, it's actually the scene you referred to earlier with Sam Neill and Patrick Swayze in the diner, and he brings up Missouri, or brings up whatever place it was that he ripped the guy's throat out, and Sam Neill is like, "There's only two things you can do if someone shoves a gun in your face, and die, or you can kill the motherfucker." It's just like so perfectly Sam Neill delivered. Like, in my head, like, so in this movie, Sam Neill's character dies, but in my head, he's faked his death, and he goes on to be Sam Elliott. He goes on to be the stranger from The Big Lebowski. Like, that's just how this movie works.
100%, yes.
Like, there was a time, and I'm not going to say there was a man, and I'm not going to use the word hero, but it took place in Missouri in 1989. It's just like you could do a whole sequel with just him telling a story at a different bar, and that would be wonderful.
Just drinking some sarsaparilla.
Yeah, a Sioux City sarsaparilla.
There was one line I enjoyed which really highlighted the 80s approach to homosexuality, where it reveals that the big goon, Wade Garrett's big goon, is like, "I used to fuck guys like you in prison." It's like, oh, it's like, oh, I'm real gay in prison, like real gay.
Yeah,
that makes me even worse.
I feel like there's a novel's worth of essays you could write about that one exchange.
Yeah. And they're matching blowback like mullets, just beautiful.
And the fact that Swayze is in like his topless, oiled up Tai Chi mode while they're having that fight.
Oh man!
If there's one thing modern action movies lack, it's homoeroticism. So
you're watching the wrong movies.
Yeah, maybe.
One thing I also highlight is Jeff Healey being in there as 2/3 of us being Canadian and 1/3 of us being adopted Canadian. Jeff Healey is a Canadian icon, and him having a very big in a big American movie that's basically his only acting role, where he's just playing music the whole time. Love it. That definitely added a lot of bonus points in my books.
Yeah, for me too. And it's also I like that they just used him as a character. Like, oh, you play in the band, and you're blind, and that's cool. And like, because he was a big deal. He was I don't know if you ever got a chance to see him live, but he put on a great live show.
And he was good. He was really good. I had no idea who Jeff Healey is. I didn't know that was the person who was playing that musician. I saw the name in the opening credits and have heard of him, but I didn't know he was blind. And when I found out later, I was really impressed because he was really, really good.
Yeah. Although he is basically the exposition machine in the script. Like, he's the guy who, like, a character shows up and he goes, "Oh, that's this character with this name from this." Like, he's just the guy. But he's kind of great at it. Like, and I do love that he sticks around through the whole movie. Like, he's just a house bar singer, a house band singer, and I did really appreciate that.
So stars, how many stars are we giving Roadhouse 1989?
Dakota, let's start with you. How many stars out of 5, whole numbers only, would you give Roadhouse 1989?
I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5, but that's a pretty strong 3 in my opinion. I had some issues with it, but overall liked it. And it's probably one of the better movies of its ilk from that era.
Yeah, that's fair.
Same from me, 3 from me. It's exactly the same reasons. I can totally see why people love it who watched it like from that time. I'm sure there's some teenage boys sneaking copies of Roadhouse in to watch over and over, as I did with a lot of sort of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. So 3 from me as well.
Yeah, and that's for me as well. I don't think it's the like unassailable classic that some might have you believe, but it's almost worse watching it front to back. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those movies that I have very strong memories of like stumbling into on TBS when I was young, and it's almost better that way. Like it's almost better with film grain and commercials than it is just watching it straight through.
Definitely feels like one of those movies that would benefit from being watched on VHS. If that makes sense, like with that kind of griminess would fit it. And maybe the resolution slowly gets to Blu-ray quality as the bar improves, as it becomes like for the plastic tables and matching polo shirts. The resolution improves.
So I do tend to go back and forth. I'm just looking at my history on Letterboxd, and the most recent time I watched it, which was earlier this week, I gave it 4 out of 5, and other times I've given it 3 out of 5. So I tend to fluctuate, but I think 3 out of 5 is pretty fair. So I think I'm going to stick there for the purposes of this show. Let's move on to the 2024 remake of Roadhouse, starring our friend Jakey G. And because, Simon, I know you love Jakey G, but I have a strong feeling that you hated this movie, I would love to hear your 2-minute plot synopsis of
2 minute. Right, you could be a timer now, are you?
Of Roadhouse 2024.
Dakota turns up and suddenly I'm on the clock. Jakey G plays Elwood. Jake Gyllenhaal is dreamy. For these reasons. Reason one, Elwood Dalton is an MMA fighter with a chip on his shoulder, and he gets into like brawls for money, and he gets employed to come and clean up the Roadhouse in Florida. And he's just a very polite, nice guy. And he gets taken to the Roadhouse and beats a couple of people up. And it turns out they are there to try and clear this bar out because again, capitalism is bad. The son of the guy who's now in prison, who's built up the local area, wants to get rid of the bar and build this like super complex. And there's crime on every level. Everyone's in his pockets, the police, the sheriff, and so on. And the more opposition Jake Dalton puts up, the more the bigger heavies are sent to clear him out. So basically it's a series of a bunch of guys are sent in and they're sent to the hospital, or sometimes taken to the hospital because Jake's so nice, he drives them. And then the heavies get bigger and bigger, and their acting gets less and less good. And then there's some fights, and there's a boat scene, and it's terrible. It's awful. I don't hate it because that would elicit an emotional response. It's just a terrible film. It's a terrible film, and it is the first film that has broken my rule, which I spoke about a few months ago, which is you put Billy Magnuson in anything, and I will enjoy that movie. This film has broken that rule. Everyone's kind of strangely bad in it. Like, apart from the one person who's truly awful to begin with, you've got great actors. You've got Daniela Melchior, who's a good actor, who's terrible in this. You've got the Joaquim de Almeida, who's a fantastic actor, terrible in this. Like, Jakey carries it through charm. He's just a very charming person, and they're going for like he's super quiet and nice because he realizes he has the beast inside him. And we know this because he tells us directly, when I get very angry, I don't like what happens. That's what's happening now. I'm angry, and so things are happening. Like, I'm not a million miles off from what the script actually does with the story. It's just terrible. It's terrible. There's no nuance to any of the storytelling. The fighting is so full of really bad like VFX to stitch these shots together. I like Doug Liman. I'm not a bit of a fan of the Bourne movies, but I love Edge of Tomorrow. I know he can direct stuff. It's just terrible. It's terrible front to back. And I'm not even gonna talk about Conor McGregor here because I don't know what's going on there. I guess you
We are
don't have to.
We are going
I
to talk
guess you
about
don't
that in a
have
minute.
to. All those years that I poured into like auditioning, and it turns out you don't need to bother. Like he is truly, truly one of the worst performances I think I've ever seen in any like publicly released film. I was thinking of calling it like student filming, and that's an insult to student films. Like he's just awful. He hasn't got an ounce of acting in him, and he walks around like he's trying not to shit himself because he thinks that's how his character should move. It's just terrible, front to back. It's awful. It's a terrible film. That's my
any dissent on that, Dakota?
I think before we get into the bad, because oh boy, there's a lot of the bad. I think it's
there is.
maybe best to start with maybe what worked. So I've got two things in particular that I think actually kind of worked for this movie. And then if anyone else has anything that worked for them, we could say that, and then we can fully unload what the fury that this movie deserves. Two things. One, I think Jake Gyllenhaal's comedy abilities have always been super underrated. And I think there are quite a few moments where his comedy absolutely shines through. He's given some really ridiculous lines. And the fact that he gives these line readings with this sort of blasé, like, I don't really care. What about you? It actually kind of makes it funnier, in my opinion. And so I sort of
Mm-hmm.
appreciated that he understood the comedy that was needed for this character, and he did actually bring it in those movies, that the moments that it's needed, specifically the scene of like where he's driving the bad guys to the hospital and stuff like that. There's several little moments like that that actually worked on a humor level for me. The other thing that actually worked for me was the performance by Arturo Castro, who plays one of the early henchmen named Mo. I first noticed him in The Menu. He was one of the douchey finance bros in that movie, the tortilla scene, one of those guys. And I thought he was sort of on the same comedy wavelength as Gyllenhaal, where the two of them understood the comedy assignment and what was needed from them. Outside of that, basically nothing worked for me, but Gyllenhaal's comedic scenes and every time Arturo Castro was on the screen worked for me.
So I think I'm definitely in the minority here in that I did not love this movie, and I fully acknowledge how terrible it is, but I was grinning through a lot of it, so I'm going to give it a pass. Because I think the movie wouldn't work without Gyllenhaal. I think it wouldn't work at all. Like I think he understood the assignment and gave it exactly what it needed in terms of like the aloofness and the comedy moments, especially. Like there's a great moment with Arturo Castro where he's like, I think you broke my arm, and Gyllenhaal's like, I definitely broke your arm. Like, it's like
I love.
There's a lot of great moments, and you're absolutely right to call out Arturo Castro, who great in The Menu. He's also one of the better parts of the Weird Al movie from a year or two ago. And he really gets it in a way that the movie needs it to. And one of my favorite moments in the whole movie is there's an all-out bar fight happening where he's one of the henchmen just having to destroy the bar. And when he like walks past Dalton, he's like, "Oh, hey, it's good to see you," and then just keeps destroying the bar.
Oh, hey, man.
Yeah, it's those moments all really work for me. I think that a lot of the non-fighting scenes are shot really nicely, and I think that they're cheating because it's Florida, but I think a lot of the framing is really gorgeous. I want to find the place where they went to the Shallows and sat in lawn chairs and drank beer. I just want to go to that place, like, and I think it was gorgeously framed. I actually disagree. I think
actually,
sorry, they shot it where?
In the Dominican Republic. The whole thing was shot there.
Great. I want to go to that place. It's gorgeous.
Right. Right.
And I think that it's not just that it helps that it's gorgeous, but I think a lot of those scenes are shot really well. I think the whole thing is, except for some of the fight scenes, which we'll get into in a minute, I think that a lot of the cinematography is really interesting and good and nicely framed. I actually sort of like Billy Magnuson in this movie. I think he's maybe coasting a little more on his dumb guy energy in this one. But I think, again, he's giving the movie what it's asking him for. And I enjoy that he's like sort of the cowardly dumb guy he's very good at all the versions of dumb guy, and I think this movie he's giving exactly what he's being asked for. The script is terrible though. I can't quite get over how basic the script is, and I really, really, really hate Simon was already talking about this, but there's no nuance in this script. There's literally a character that calls out, "Oh, hey, this is just like a Western. Oh, hey, there's a genre shift happening in this moment in the script." So many characters show up and say, "Hi, I'm the owner of the Roadhouse." "Oh, what's your bar called?" "The Roadhouse." Ha ha. Oh, and that person who named the Roadhouse also named my houseboat, which is called The Boat, which is, I'll admit, I actually chuckled at that one very slightly, but like that was about it in terms of most of everyone else's comedy lines, at least.
I'm glad. Can I interrupt you with? I'm glad you haven't said my favorite that I've just remembered, and thank you also for pointing out Arturo Castro, who was fantastic in this.
Yeah.
But there's my favorite part of this whole movie, where in the big showdown they get Conor McGregor and Jakey get into this boat for the final punch up, and Conor McGregor's like, "Oh look, we've got our own octagon," and Jakey's like, "Who taught you shapes?" That's my favorite part of the whole movie.
I did laugh at that a lot, yeah. And I think that's another great example of, like, I think Gyllenhaal gets it. I think Gyllenhaal gets what the movie needs. Because, like, if that was played any other way, it just wouldn't work. And in the same, it's very similar in that, like, I don't think original Roadhouse would work without Swayze. I think anyone else would have maybe flubbed it a little bit. Or made it not as good, and I think this movie wouldn't be as good as it is without Jake hitting that like exact sort of performance that the movie needs.
You can 100% this movie with a different, lesser actor, and it being 1,000 times worse. Like you can literally see the moment where Gyllenhaal is elevating the material, literally.
Yeah. You can basically watch him carrying it all on his back the whole time.
That's his superpower, isn't it? He is that good.
And I say that as someone who actually I really like. Her name's got out of my head.
Daniela Melchior?
No, the woman who owns the bar, Jessica Williams. I really like her, but her and Daniela. Yeah, she has nothing to do. Daniela Melchior has nothing to do. Like, so many people just have nothing to do. Like, the bartender woman, whose name I also don't remember, has, like, very little to do. She has, like, one substantive scene, I guess you could argue. And I guess my problem here is that Roadhouse 1989 takes place in an alternate universe, and it is 100% committed to that universe. And this movie takes place in our universe and tries to point out things that are, like, it doesn't... Because it's not committed, the stuff that's ridiculous doesn't really work. Like, a guy dies by Chekhov's alligator, and it doesn't work. Because it's just not committed in the same way. And I feel like that's a real failing of the film. Even though I laughed at it, laughing at it in the way that it wanted me to be laughing at it, if that makes sense. Right?
Yeah.
But we're sort of dancing around the elephant in the room here, which is that Conor McGregor is a capital C choice, and I don't quite get how they landed there. And I'm going to couch this by saying I think that Conor McGregor, in the scenes where he's not talking, which is the scenes that he is just fighting, I think if that dude took some acting classes, he could be a real presence as a bad guy in schlocky B movies like this. But every time he opens his mouth, it's terrible. Because he's acting as though he's like mugging for the camera at a UFC weigh-in, not like he's in a movie.
So bad.
And
he's a piece of shit as well. Can we just say that at this point? He is a well-documented piece of shit with multiple sexual assault charges, domestic assault, like very public. I know this thing's been in production hell for a while, but this has been ongoing for many, many years. Whoever they hired him for his name and nothing else, and didn't give a shit about the kind of person he is and represents. That really fucked me off.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the other thing to bring up is that I think that he could be a real presence with some acting classes, but he shouldn't be because he's a piece of shit. He's also the kind of guy who shows up in a pinstripe suit, and when you look at the pinstripes, they spell out "fuck you." Like, he's just an asshole, and I don't like rewarding assholes.
Such an asshole.
I have a theory about the Conor McGregor part. I feel like the script was written. They've got, this quippy, very muscular guy who could do his own fighting, all that sort of stuff. They've been looking at John Cena and the run that he's been on the last few years of in Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, even his pure comedy roles and stuff like Trainwreck. He's just been crushing. I think they wrote this script in mind of being like, we're gonna get John Cena, and then John Cena passed on because he's super busy and can pick way better projects. And they're like, great, who else can we pick that's also really big and strong, but also kind of funny? Can Dave Bautista do it? Oh, Bautista's too busy. He's saying no. Okay, this isn't the Rock's type of movie because we're gonna need to rework it. He's gonna have to be the main character. He's gonna have to win and actually not be a bad guy at all. So the Rock is out. Who else do we got? Oh, okay, Conor McGregor says he wants to act. Let's go with him. And even putting aside this idea, the fact that he is one of the worst human beings alive right now, just a god awful person. The fact that he could have shown up, kicked a lot of ass, said a few quippy lines, and he can't even do that. And we're gonna get to the actual fighting styles, but how do you hire Conor McGregor for all of his warts and not allow him to be a better action star? Like, I'm just baffled by that.
Do you know what
I have a theory. I have a theory about this actually, and I think it's tied into what you're talking about. But they have very clearly licensed UFC. UFC is involved in the making of the movie, and UFC was like, "Let's make this movie. Give your character a UFC backstory, and you have to use one of our stars. And by the way, that star is going to be Conor McGregor." I can't see it happening other way because he's not good.
It reminded me of when Guy Ritchie threw Vinnie Jones into his movies as the funny tough guy. Vinnie Jones, who had the reputation of being like the nose breaker in football. He was a rough guy, and it turns out he can deliver. He's able to deliver lines. He's able to act to a point in movies, and it reminded me a bit of that kind of swing. But I'm watching this movie and thinking, why did you not hire Scott Adkins for this role? Like, you need a big foil for Jakey looking the way he does. And what was he too busy for this? Because he would have been great in this as well.
I mean, I don't know. I think it's just a case of probably stunt casting gone wrong. I would be shocked if UFC wasn't involved in being like, by the way, use Conor, or we'll give you a shitload more money for this, right? In the same way that I actually think that recasting Dalton's backstory as being like he killed his friend in the octagon is a mistake. I think leaving that more vague like the original does gives it much more, not just more allure because you can sort of imagine whatever you want, but also just more power because you can imagine what you want. It's not something that needs to be shown because this is a Western, right? We don't need to know the man with no name's we can assume that he's a tortured person because he's a roaming gunfighter. It doesn't matter. And I feel like every time that this film tries to explain backstory, it fails. In the same way where there's a moment where Jessica Williams reveals that she's the last holdout in the town to sell out. And I feel like the movie would be better if it just had led with that. Just buy into it immediately. Don't try and make it some mystery she's keeping from Dalton. Just be like, hey, I inherited this Roadhouse. I'm the last person who hasn't sold out to the gangsters. I want to not sell out to the gangsters. Will you help me? And I'll give you a shitload of money to do it. That's automatically a better movie in my mind because it sort of throws everything on its head, right? We already know the mystery. We've seen the original. It doesn't matter. Just go with it. Just buy into it. But it doesn't have the balls to do that. So anyway, sorry, I cut you off, Dakota.
That's okay. And I'll just sort of tack on one thing about the Jessica Williams character there, where when she reveals this information, she also sort of inadvertently reveals that she was well aware that goons would be coming after whoever she hires because that's what has already been done. And so she was basically setting up Dalton to have to do all these fights and to do this. This wasn't a standard job to just clean up a bar. And so that kind of makes her a bit of the villain as well, a bit of an antagonist. And I thought that was almost interesting for a moment, but then I realized, no, this is all stupid and you just ruined any sort of character development you've been trying to do for this character here.
Well, I mean, One of the great things about the original one, we didn't talk about it when we were talking about the original one, but one of the great scenes in the original movie, I think, is actually the very beginning where they establish that Dalton is like this famous bouncer, right up to this guy who's causing trouble in the bar, being like, "I always wanted to try against you," and Dalton being like, basically like getting him outside, and then just smirking and walking back inside because it doesn't matter because he doesn't actually want to fight, whereas Jake Gyllenhaal wants to fight, and I feel like it's a lesser movie because of it, right? It's and like I say, I grinned my way through a lot of this movie, and I'm being pretty negative on it because it is a bad movie, but I still kind of had fun watching it for the parts of it that I liked. So I don't know. Do with that information what you will. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to touch on with this one, or are we?
One last thing I want to touch on. There's a piece of trivia in IMDb that says every fight in the film uses full CG body doubles due to the production using a new multi-pass method to do seamless punches and kicks instead of faking hits or cutting around the action to be believable. In every fight, the doubles are stitched into the edit for a few frames before stitching back to real footage. And this was noticeable the very first scene with Post Malone, who also is a god awful actor and should not. I was completely unbelievable as a bare knuckle boxing champion. Like Brad Pitt's the bare knuckle boxing champion in Snatch, not Post Malone in Roadhouse remake. Every single fight sequence in this was, I kid you not, some of the worst CGI I have ever seen. It looked like bad video game cut scenes. That's how awful it was. This brings me back to the Conor McGregor part of why do you cast Conor McGregor if you're not going to allow him to actually fight?
So I have a couple thoughts about this. One is that why do you cast Conor McGregor if you're not going to let him actually fight? And I think the answer there is that if you let him actually fight, he'd probably punch someone and then try and play it off as an accident because he's a terrible human being. The other thing is that they didn't just use digital doubles. It's basically a pillow fight. So they film a guy punching a green pillow, and then they film another guy getting hit with a green pillow, and then they stitch those two things together. And it does look bad most of the time. However, what's interesting about that is that I don't know if you've seen the film Raging Fire, which is a Donnie Yen action movie, but they use the same technique in Raging Fire, and it's totally fine. So I don't know what happened here to make it so much worse, but like I've seen it before, and it didn't look terrible. And I think the only sort of good fight scene in this is the one where he gets the goons outside first and is like, "Do you have insurance? Like, do you have dental?" Like, and then he like slaps them a bunch of times. I liked that fight. But yeah, the two big fights with Conor McGregor are both just awful. And but again, like I feel like it's disappointing how bad of an actor he is, aside from all the other real world stuff, because like he's clearly giving his all to the fights, even though they suck. And I don't know. He probably could be. He couldn't be Batista because Batista's the best of the like wrestlers turned actor, but he could maybe be a Rock if he really wanted to be, like choosing safe roles that he can play into. He knows he can play into, but again, he shouldn't because he's terrible, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that will be the result of this. No one's going to hire him now.
I also just hate his like little swagger, and I don't mean his attitude. I mean he literally has a physical swagger when he walks around. Like he's like a toddler. Absolutely. He's like an 8-year-old on set trying to act tough, which he shouldn't have to do because he's Conor McGregor. Anyway, it's a whole thing. Yeah. So how many negative stars? How many negative stars are you going to give it? I'm going to start this off by saying that I am giving this. I grinned my way through most of this movie. I fully admit that's mostly on the strength of Gyllenhaal and the location and some of the comedy beats, but it is a very weak 3 from me. Like I thought it was fine. Wow. I thought it was fine.
You gave the original one a 3 as well.
Well, I give the original one a 3 or a 4 depending on the day that I watch it, but I still think I had more fun with this one than not. Right? So, like, I definitely liked it more than you guys. Like the other one is an okay movie. This one is a movie that has come full circle from being like so bad that it's good again for me. So again, do with that information what you will.
Do you want to go first, Simon, or do you want me?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think for the same reasons. For Jakey's perfect comment delivery as ever, and for Anchiro Castro's, oh, hey, man, 2 stars.
I did love the scene at the end where Castro's leaving. He's like, "These people were not as nice as I thought. I just want to ride bikes, man."
You know how hard that is in Florida to find a groove? Yeah, it's 2 stars. No. 1 star. 1 star. Sorry, 1 star. Did I say 2? 1
You said
star.
2, yeah.
Oh, I retract that. It was always 1 star. I just got distracted by my own appreciation of Archiro Castro. It is 1 star for Jakey and Archiro. The rest is irredeemable and completely pointless.
I'm gonna split the difference between you two and give it a 2 out of 5, but it is a very weak 2 out of 5. I could very easily switch it down to 1 if I wanted to. But you're right, Matthew. There are more than enough comedic beats that kind of had me smiling and giggling to myself, specifically just Jake Gyllenhaal and Arturo Castro. Everything about this movie is absolute dog shit in the worst fight I've ever seen in a movie.
It's funny because, and again, I know that I have a higher tolerance for shitty movies than certainly either of you two, but like, this is the kind of thing that like one day when I'm bored and I'm doing something else, it'll probably be on in the background. Like that's the kind of movie it is for me. So
I look forward to never watching this film again. Like I'm gleefully anticipating never seeing this film again.
Yeah, I have movies like that, and this is not one of them.
I am baffled by Doug Liman's filmography. This is the guy that has directed Swingers, The Bourne Identity, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Edge of Tomorrow, American Made. But this is also the guy that did Chaos Walking and Lockdown and what else? Jumper and stuff like that.
I have a soft spot. I have a soft spot for Jumper, to be fair. But yeah, you're not wrong.
This man clearly only has 2 levels of some of the most fun popcorn movies in some of the worst schlock imaginable. Like there's literally nothing in between.
Yep. He also has some like weird, unappreciated classics. Like Go is a really fun movie in a bad way, in early Sarah Polley kind of way.
I just remembered something. If he's worked a bunch with Tom Cruise, if he had worked with Tom Cruise again, do you think they would have kept the running joke of "I would have thought you're bigger"?
I would hope.
Or did they doing that? Tom was like, "No."
Honestly, I would hope so, and I feel like honestly, like we give Tom Cruise a lot of shit, but I think he'd probably be game for that kind of thing. To be totally honest, like I can 100% imagine Tom Cruise in that scene where he's like, "I thought you'd be bigger," and you just replied, "Opinions vary."
Yeah. Did you hear the "be nice" line in the final like climactic battle between Conor McGregor and Jakey? At one point, he punches Jake, and Jake in the middle, the ADRs the line in without his face. "Be nice." Like, oh, we're referencing the movie at this weird point.
The only one that I really remember as being like a direct reference to the movie in the script was the moment when Jakey says that no one ever wins a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I'm sure there's more, but that's the main one.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly because that's true.
There's a shop next to the bookstore called the Double Deuce.
Yeah,
that's probably
that
the only
too.
real reference.
Yeah, I mean that and the character being called Dalton and being a Roadhouse, but
yeah,
so bad. Well, Amazon continues to impress. That's all I can say.
I do kind of wonder actually if this might have been like, I get why they dumped it to streaming, and I will say that like if you check out the reviews, like you guys aren't disagreeing with a lot of the reviews, but a lot of them seem to be landing more where I am, where like this is stupid, but I still had fun. And I kind of wonder if the general reception would be better if we had all seen it. And not just like we all, I mean like the 3 of us, but I think it might have been funner in a cinema with a group of guys, like with a group of dudes who are into this kind of movie. And in the same way that I like, and I don't dislike Jurassic World, but I definitely had a better time the first time I saw it in a big screen with a crowd who was into it. I wonder if this movie would be better in that way as well. I wonder if the crowd experience would have lent something to it that the streaming experience just is unable to. You don't have, it's a rhetorical question, but it's just a thought that I had, because I wonder about that sometimes with these movies, where there's definitely movies that I have enjoyed better because I'm with a group of people having a communal experience, even if they're bad. And I feel like this one just might have been one of those if I'd had the chance. So I don't know.
I think you're reaching.
I don't know. I mean, again, I had fun. I just wonder if maybe I would have had more fun if it had been a different kind of experience. Because, I hate going to the movies because of assholes in cinemas, but I love going to the movies because when a crowd connects with the film you're watching, it automatically makes the whole thing better. And I think a movie like this with a crowd of like-minded people might have been a lot of fun. So I don't know. I fully admit I'm definitely in the minority in our group here, at least. So as always, though, I'm on team see it for yourself, because you should always see everything for yourself. So, anyway. Well, so anyone have anything else they want to say about the houses on the road before we wrap up the show?
You should definitely watch 1989's Roadhouse. See that for yourself. And I would say literally do anything else than watch the new Roadhouse with your time. Use your time wisely on this earth. Go out and look at a tree for like 90 minutes. You'll get more out of life than watching new Roadhouse.
Just watch paint drying, which is available to stream.
Just go and get an ice cream. Walk down the street and literally do anything else with your time. This short time on this earth.
What do you think?
Okay, pop quiz. What's the one movie that connects Jake Gyllenhaal and Patrick Swayze?
Donnie Darko.
Oh,
yeah.
Congratulations. There we go.
Is that the only one, though? Because he was a kid actor. I'd assume he'd have more.
Anyone I could find.
Interesting.
Good job. So
watching this Roadhouse made me want to just either watch Miami Vice, because I watched it recently, really loved it, or Warrior. Either of those movies are better versions of what this was going for.
And Warrior, you're talking about the Joel Edgerton and Tom Hardy movie, right? Yeah, that's actually a very underrated movie. I feel like we don't talk about it in the same way we should be talking about the movie in the same breath as like the Rocky series, but we just don't for some reason.
Interesting.
Mainly because of who's in it. Not it's a pretty standard story, but like the performances are great. Yeah. Well, so we're gonna wrap it up there. Before we go, Dakota, why don't you plug your stuff? Promote yourself, sir.
Sure. Okay, I'll plug myself.
Plug yourself.
So you can
just like
phrasing. Are we still doing phrasing?
You can check out my podcast, Contra Zoom Pod. It's available on all podcast platforms. You can go to our website, contrazoompod.com, where we also publish reviews. There's a whole bunch of great writers that publish reviews there as well under that banner. And you can follow us on all social media channels at Contra Zoom Pod. Spelt the normal way pod is spelt.
Why do you feel the need to specify that? There's got to be a story there, right?
No, I don't know. Every time I see Contra Zoom, they're always like, Contra what? Contra who? And so I'm just making a joke of CONTRA.
I was just imagining some guy like tried to spell it like Contra Zoom PAWD or something. Something ridiculous like that.
I don't know. It was just a joke that didn't land.
Yeah, fair enough. We have lots of those, so don't feel called out about it.
That's our whole life. That's it. That's all we got. We don't care.
Yeah. Well, that is the show. So the Rhodes houses are both available to stream on Amazon Prime, and I think we can all agree that if you're going to watch one of them, watch the original, as it is a classic. And as opposed to, again, I'm going to reiterate, I think that the new one is so bad it's good, but the original one is just good, so you should watch that one. If you've liked the show, if you've liked our banter, if you've liked Dakota as our guest star here, you can support us in a number of ways, the most direct of which is we do have a Patreon and a Ko-fi. Those are both going to be linked in the show notes, but the Patreon is patreon.com/mcsimpson, because I'm too lazy to change it. And for as little as $2 a month, you can support us. And if you do that, you do also get our bonus episodes for patrons only. This week, we talked a lot about home media, which I know will come as a shock to regular listeners. And also other remakes we preferred to their originals, and a few other great conversations. It's about an extra 30 minutes if you wanted to tune into that. You can also support us in all the usual ways, which would be subscribe on your podcasting platform of choice. Hit that like button. Give us a 5-star review. Give us some feedback. We want to hear from you. Did you like Roadhouse? We would love to hear your opinion on this, because believe me, opinions are divided if you check on the review sites. Second to last but not least, we are here on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations in Vancouver, BC. Last but not least, thank you so much, Dakota, for joining us this week. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. And that is it. Thank you for joining us on this awesome Friday.
Thanks, bye.